I want to begin very quietly, because the most important things are never announced with a shout. There comes a moment in one's life when the noise falls away, when the crowd disperses, and you find yourself alone with yourself. And instead of feeling comforted, you feel strangely exposed. That feeling, what we so quickly label as loneliness, is not a mistake. It is not a failure. It is an invitation. Now let me ask you something, and I want you to be honest with yourself before you answer. Have you ever felt most alone, not when others left you, but when you began to see through things you once depended on? If this resonates with you, I invite you to share your experience in the comments below, because this question touches something universal and deeply human. We are taught from an early age that loneliness is a problem to be solved. We speak of it as if it were a disease, something to be cured with company, distraction, or noise. And yet, I have noticed something quite peculiar. The deeper a person begins to understand life, the more they experience periods of profound aloneness. Not isolation, mind you, but aloneness. These two are very different, and confusing them causes immense suffering. Isolation is resistance. It is the closing of the heart. Loneliness, in its deeper sense, is awareness. It is what happens when the mind can no longer hide behind borrowed beliefs, social roles, or constant stimulation. When the scaffolding of identity begins to fall away, there is a silence left behind. And that silence can feel terrifying until you realize it is also extraordinarily alive. You see, most people are rarely alone. Even when they sit by themselves, their minds are crowded with voices, the opinions of society, the expectations of parents, the comparisons with neighbors, the endless commentary of thought. True loneliness arises not when others are absent, but when these voices begin to lose their authority. And that is not a loss, it is growth. There is a strange irony here. We seek companionship to escape loneliness, yet the more we cling to others for reassurance, the further we drift from understanding who we truly are. When relationships become a means of self-validation rather than shared exploration, they turn into distractions from the self rather than expressions of it. And so life, in its peculiar wisdom, occasionally withdraws these comforts to see if we can stand on our own feet. This is why loneliness often accompanies inner growth. When you begin questioning the rules you once followed without thought, when you notice the absurdity of chasing approval, when you no longer feel satisfied with shallow conversations or borrowed ambitions, you naturally feel out of step with the world around you. And that is not arrogance. It is clarity. Most people are terrified of being alone because they have never been introduced to themselves. They have been trained to see the self as something inadequate, something that must be improved, justified, or constantly entertained. But when you sit quietly with yourself, without trying to fix anything, you may discover that the self is not an object at all. It is a process, a happening. And loneliness is simply the awareness of that happening without distractions. Think of it this way. When a seed begins to sprout, it must break open. From the outside, this looks like destruction, but from the inside, it is the only way growth can occur. In the same manner, when the old structures of identity crack, you feel exposed, raw, and uncertain. That sensation is often labeled loneliness, but in truth, it is transformation. I have often said that the universe is not something you are in, it is something you are doing. And when you begin to sense this, not intellectually, but directly, many of the games people play start to feel hollow. The constant competition, the endless busyness, the obsessive need to be seen and heard, it all feels like noise covering up a fear of silence. And once you are no longer afraid of that silence, you may find yourself standing alone. This is why loneliness is so frequently misunderstood. Society treats it as a symptom of social failure. But spiritually speaking, it is often a sign that you are no longer asleep. You are no longer content with second-hand meanings. You want to see for yourself, and seeing for yourself is always a solitary act. Now, this does not mean that you should reject others or withdraw from life. Quite the opposite. But it does mean that you stop using others as mirrors to reassure you of your existence. You no longer ask, "Who am I in your eyes?" You begin to ask, What is this experience right now before I name it? That shift is subtle, but it changes everything. Loneliness, then, is not the absence of love. It is the absence of illusion. And illusions, while comforting, are also heavy burdens. When they fall away, you feel lighter but also ungrounded, like standing on the edge of a vast space with no familiar landmarks. The mind panics and says, something is wrong, but nothing is wrong at all. You are simply awake in a place you have never visited consciously before. If you are feeling lonely right now, I would invite you not to run from it. Do not immediately fill it with noise, screens, or endless conversation. Sit with it, just for a moment. Listen to what it is asking of you. Because very often loneliness is not saying, find someone. It is saying, come home. And this is where the real journey begins, not toward becoming someone else, but toward recognizing what you already are beneath all the roles, labels, and expectations. That recognition is not always comfortable. Growth rarely is, but it is profoundly honest. So, as you listen to this, consider this possibility. Perhaps your loneliness is not a sign that something is missing from your life, but that something unnecessary is falling away. And if that is the case, then what you are experiencing is not emptiness but space. Pause with that thought for a moment, because in that space, something entirely new can emerge. When you discover space within yourself, the immediate temptation is to fill it. The mind is an excellent interior decorator. It rushes in with furniture made of beliefs, opinions, ambitions, and anxieties. Silence, after all, feels unfamiliar. And yet, I suggest that this very discomfort is evidence that something authentic is taking place. You are encountering life without padding. Loneliness sharpens perception. When you are no longer constantly leaning on others for meaning, you begin to notice subtleties you once overlooked: the rhythm of your breath, the texture of your thoughts, the way emotions arise and dissolve without permission. This is not self-absorption, it is intimacy with existence, and intimacy always requires vulnerability. There is a popular myth that enlightenment, or inner growth, if you prefer a gentler term, makes one perpetually blissful, socially magnetic, and immune to pain. This is quite absurd. Growth does not anesthetize you, it sensitizes you. And a sensitive being feels loneliness more keenly, not less. But the difference is this: loneliness is no longer interpreted as rejection by the world, but as a deeper conversation with it. We are so accustomed to defining ourselves by our relationships: who needs us, who desires us, who validates us, that when those definitions loosen, we panic. If I am not useful, we ask, do I exist? This is the tragedy of a culture that mistakes function for being. You are not here to justify your existence. You are here because existence is happening as you. And so when loneliness arises during inner growth, it is often because you are shedding the habit of turning yourself into an object for others. You are no longer performing, you are listening. And performers are rarely lonely, but listeners often are, because listening takes you out of the crowd and into the present moment. Consider how rarely we allow ourselves to be fully present without an audience. Even in solitude, we imagine ourselves being observed, judged, remembered. But when that imaginary audience fades, there is a sudden quiet, and in that quiet you may feel small, even insignificant. Yet insignificance, properly understood, is liberation. It means you are no longer carrying the burden of being important. This is why inner growth can feel strangely isolating. You stop competing, stop proving, stop pretending to know things you do not. Conversations may feel thinner, interests may diverge, and you may find yourself unable to participate in the usual games of status and comparison. This is not because you are superior. It is because you are no longer hypnotized. Now, let me be very clear. Loneliness is not something to romanticize endlessly. If it becomes chronic despair, if it hardens into bitterness or self-pity, then it has ceased to be a teacher and has become a prison. The difference lies in awareness. Loneliness observed becomes wisdom. Loneliness resisted becomes suffering. Ask yourself, when you feel lonely, am I resisting this feeling or am I curious about it? Resistance says, this should not be happening. Curiosity says, what is this? And that simple shift from judgment to inquiry is the doorway to freedom. You may notice that as you grow inwardly, your tolerance for superficial connection diminishes. You would rather have one honest silence than 100 empty exchanges. And yes, this can be painful, but it is also a sign of integrity. You are no longer willing to trade authenticity for belonging, and belonging purchased at the cost of self is always loneliness in disguise. There is a profound paradox here. The more comfortable you become with being alone, the more genuinely you can be with others, because you no longer approach relationships as transactions. You are not saying, complete me, or distract me from myself. You are saying, here I am. And that is an entirely different quality of presence. Loneliness, then, is not the enemy of love. It is the purification of it. It strips away dependency and leaves appreciation. It removes clinging and reveals choice. When you no longer need others to fill a void, you can actually meet them as they are, not as solutions to your discomfort. If you are in a phase of life where you feel disconnected, misunderstood, or quietly alone despite being surrounded by people, I would urge you not to assume something has gone wrong. Very often, something has gone right. You are transitioning from borrowed meaning to lived meaning, and transitions are rarely comfortable. This is the stage where many people turn back. They rush to rejoin the noise, to reclaim familiar identities, to dull the ache with distraction. And there is no moral judgment in that. Everyone moves at their own pace. But if you can remain present with this loneliness without making it a problem, you may discover that it transforms. Because beneath loneliness is aloneness, and beneath aloneness is unity. The sense of being separate begins to soften, and you realize that what you thought was isolation is actually intimacy with everything. The world has not withdrawn from you, it has simply stopped shouting. And when the shouting stops, you can finally hear what has always been speaking. What you begin to hear, when the noise subsides, is not a voice giving instructions. It is a presence quiet, expansive, and unmistakably intimate. It does not say who you should become. It reveals that you already are. And this realization dissolves the deepest root of loneliness, the belief that you are separate from life. At first, this can feel unsettling. The mind prefers clear boundaries, solid identities, familiar stories. But reality is fluid. You are not a fixed thing looking out at a foreign world. You are an event in the universe, the same way a wave is an event in the ocean. And when this is seen, not merely understood intellectually, but felt, loneliness loses its sting. You may still be alone, but you are no longer lonely. This is a crucial distinction. Aloneness is natural. Everything in existence arises alone and together at the same time. A tree grows alone, yet it is inseparable from the soil, the rain, the sun, and the air. In the same way, you experience life from a unique perspective, yet that perspective is woven into everything else. Loneliness only exists when you forget this relationship. Inner growth, then, is a process of remembering. Remembering that you do not have to earn your place in the universe. Remembering that awareness itself is enough. And as this remembering deepens, your relationship with solitude changes. It becomes nourishing rather than threatening. You stop asking, why am I alone? And begin asking, what is this moment asking of me? And very often the answer is simple. Be here, not to fix, not to improve, not to escape, just to be present with what is. This presence has an interesting side effect. People may still come and go from your life, but you are no longer devastated by their departure nor desperate for their arrival. You appreciate connection without clinging to it. You enjoy companionship without fearing solitude, and that balance is the mark of genuine inner maturity. It is also the foundation of real love. love that does not grasp, love that does not demand, love that does not arise from fear of being alone. When you are comfortable in your own company, you offer others freedom rather than dependency, and freedom is the greatest gift one human being can give another. If you look closely, you will notice that many of the world's anxieties stem from an inability to sit quietly with oneself. We build endless systems of entertainment, productivity, and distraction to avoid that encounter. But avoidance only prolongs the fear. The courage to be alone even briefly reveals that there was never anything to fear in the first place. This is why loneliness can be such a powerful teacher. It exposes the habits of escape. It shows you where you have been outsourcing your sense of self. And once you see that, you can stop, you can rest, you can let life move through you rather than constantly trying to manage it. I am not suggesting that you withdraw from the world or reject human connection. I am suggesting that you stop using the world as a shield against yourself. When you meet yourself honestly, without condemnation or idealization, you meet life itself. And life, as it turns out, is not lonely. So if you find yourself walking alone, literally or metaphorically, do not rush to label it as a problem. Walk consciously. Feel the ground beneath your feet. Notice the breath entering and leaving your body without effort. Let the moment be what it is, because in that simple awareness, the illusion of separation begins to dissolve. Loneliness fades not because someone arrives, but because you realize you were never abandoned. You were simply being invited to see more clearly. And clarity, though it may begin in solitude, always ends in connection. Not connection as dependency, not connection as escape, but connection as truth. And when you live from that truth, you will discover something quietly astonishing. Even when you are alone, you are not separate. You are participating in the whole of existence here, now, and effortlessly so. And that is not loneliness. That is freedom.